All righty. So, hello everyone. I'm Saba Alemnu. We're excited to have you here. I am a second year here at Ross, and I'll be moderating the conversation here today on the Founders Playbook, Forging the Black Path to Entrepreneurship. I'm excited to have this panel here today. We have awesome guest speakers lined up for you. We have a couple entrepreneurs and a couple of investors on the panel today. And yeah, looking forward to having this conversation. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Let's start with some introductions. Maybe Erica, you could start. We could go to Eric, then LC, and then Cheryl.
Sure, sounds good. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here today. I'm Erica Hairston. I'm the co-founder and CEO of EdLift. We're a tech startup that is helping more college students and adult learners through computer science classes. And I have a background in computer science and software engineering. And before that was a product manager at LinkedIn. So very excited to be here. I'll pass it to Eric.
Hey everyone, my name is Eric Campbell. I'm a managing partner at Value Investment Group, which is a family office focused on venture and influencer-backed equity. We've invested in over 140 companies with 40 plus exits. And previous to that, I was running operations and strategy for the Middle East and Africa at Uber. Excited to be here.
My next. Hi, everybody. My name is LC. I'm actually a Ross alum, graduated last year, May 2020. So go Blue, super excited to be here. I am the co-founder and CMO of Breadless, which is a savory sandwich shop that serves sandwiches on fresh and nutritious greens without any bread. I'm also a full-time product marketing manager at Microsoft, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you.
Awesome.
Hey everyone, my name is Cheryl Campos. I am a Harvard alum, went and majored in economics and went into banking and finance. I'm now the head of venture growth and partnerships at Republic. We are a spin out of AngelList that allows anyone to invest in startups and for startups to raise up to $1 million and starting next month, $5 million. So we've helped over 250 companies raise over $150 million, and we acquired 3 new companies last year. So I'm actually going to be moving up again in terms of promotion to more corp dev strategy roles. And apart from that, I'm a scout for Lightspeed, and I'm also an investment partner at the Community Fund, which is a $5 million fund focused on community-centric startups. So also very happy to be here.
Awesome. So as you can see, we have some amazing panelists, amazing backgrounds and experiences. So without further ado, I'd just love to jump into the conversation. So oftentimes in entrepreneurship, we heard earlier on a panel just before this about wealth inequality. And one of the things, one of the panelists mentioned is, entrepreneurship really can be a path towards building that financial freedom, building wealth, especially within the Black community. So one of the things I've noticed, though, when it comes to entrepreneurial ecosystem and the investment ecosystem is, it just seems like some people have access to certain information that others don't, or they may be exposed to it at a much earlier age, which influence their decisions to do that full time. So I'd love to hear from all of you, if you could just describe how you were introduced to entrepreneurship and or the investment ecosystem, and really what made you realize that that was attainable for you, especially considering some of the lack of representation of our people within both of these industries. Erica, we can start with you, or whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first here. So this is one of those stories for me that I didn't know that I could be a startup founder and entrepreneur, even though it was in my household. So I call my dad kind of like the definition of a hustler. He's that guy who owns over 150 domain names. He'll try to sell you one for $1,000. But he's always been starting businesses on the side from his full-time job. So I grew up in a house where if you saw a problem, it was your job to try to figure out how to solve it. But I still, was on that path of you go to college, you get a good degree, and you work at a good company. And that's kind of the path that I was on all the way up until my sophomore year of college, when actually Michael Seibel, the president, a Black man of Y Combinator, a startup accelerator, came back to my university at Yale. He's an alumni. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a Black guy who's so successful in Silicon Valley. And it was the first time where I actually saw myself kind of in that shoes. And he said something pretty profound, which was, we all think impact is working at a big company and impacting millions of people, and that's the definition of success. But what if you had the audacity to try to build that yourself? And kind of when I met him, that was the first time where I saw I have the skills and the knowledge and what it takes to build something. And ever since then, was on this path to build, solutions to problems I experience. So that was my introduction into startups and entrepreneurship. Yeah. Anyone else want to take it?
Yeah, I can go next. My background is pretty similar. I would say that I've always been surrounded by entrepreneurship in some way. My grandfather worked full time at Ford and retired from there, but he was also the pastor of our church, and churches are a business. My grandmother was a full time mom. She also worked in banking, but she also had a huge seamstress business. I mean, she did weddings, she did proms and homecomings, and everyone's in our communities, including mine. My mom worked full time for the state of Michigan as an agent, but she also had a business on the side making soaps and oils that our communities used. So all of these individuals, I would say, like really influenced me because they had that grit and that determination, but they brought something to life that others valued. So that was inspirational to me and taught me that like I could have a full-time job or I can go straight into entrepreneurship. It's just whatever I pursue and what interests me, I just need to have the energy and the passion to make that happen. For me personally, I first went into entrepreneurship based on my love of travel. So I loved planning trips for people and events. And I had a small little business for it, and it was called Trip Frenemy. And it was a hobby. And next thing I know, the business was, people were asking me to plan trips that I knew. Then it was some strangers. Then it was like HBS and MIT and other big groups. So I ended up, doing that for a while by myself. I did end up putting it to the side before business school because I started to feel like the travel space was oversaturated and I wanted to focus on a product-based business. I just didn't know what that would be at the time. Now, my husband, Mark, who's the co-founder and CEO of Breadless, he spent most of his professional career in finance and investing, and he also did entrepreneurship as a personal passion. So I feel like for us with Breadless, with his skills gained from business and finance and entrepreneurship, mine with entrepreneurship and just having that exposure to my family, that really influenced that entrepreneurial spirit, I guess. And we knew that it would be attainable just because it was something that we saw and that we were used to. So that really speaks to that point, Saba, that you made about, seeing that exposure, seeing Black and Brown people being able to do this is really important. So that's why we're passionate about making sure people know that they can do it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Eric or Cheryl?
Yeah, I can take this one as well. So I actually, when I was growing up, I thankfully was part of Prep for Prep, which is essentially a 14-month program that allows anyone, that allows actually Black and Brown folks in underprivileged schools go into a preparatory program that allows you to then get at the level of private school. So through that, I was able to go into independent private school on the Upper East Side through a scholarship. And they also were very adamant on teaching us different things. So the National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship actually took us for an entire summer to learn about how to start a business. But I think they were very focused on more of like small business versus startups. And so I actually thought entrepreneurship was just small business. When I went to Harvard, people know here in venture capital that 40% of VCs are either Harvard or Stanford. But they missed me because I was just with the Latinx and Black community and no one there was in VC. So I actually completely missed the boat on that side. And then last but not least, I thought tech was for people who knew CS, not me, right? Like code and me, we don't really work together. And so I was just focusing on my strengths, and obviously I wanted to be the breadwinner for my family. So I went into banking because of that. Now, that being said, it was because of finance that I went into venture, because I figured out through Republic that even it's fintech, right? So I knew the finance part. I knew nothing about the tech part, but I felt like because it was democratizing access for anyone to invest in startups, this would be something that I would be able to support and be passionate about, versus in banking, private equity, which just kind of, sucked the soul out of me, quite frankly. So now it's something that I'm very passionate about. I think more than ever now, people are starting to realize, instead of going to public markets, like the whole GameStop thing that just happened, right? Now people are realizing that you can also invest in the private markets. And so we're the Robin Hood for private investing, which means that you can invest anything from startups to real estate, video games, crypto, all these things on our platform, which, by the way, sneak peek, we may have more offerings on the way. So it's something that I think is just super important to me. And now that I also have direct investing roles through the Lesbian Community Fund, I also realize that we're the people who give the benefit of the doubt to others. And I'm like, who am I to give the benefit of the doubt to others when it should be democratized that anyone around the world can make their own personal judgment as to whether or not they can give their money to an entrepreneur that's hustling and can believes in their mission. And that's why like 40% of our founders are women, 20% are Black Latinx, which doesn't seem like much, but compared to the venture ecosystem, it's a lot. It's astronomical, actually. So we have a lot of progress to make, but I think it's something that, especially with the $5 million cap changing in March, it will really change the game as to our visibility and to making sure that rising tide lifts all boats, and every single founder on a platform could get funded.
That's amazing, Cheryl. We'll definitely get into that a bit more later in the conversation, especially around the democratization piece. Eric, you want to go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, sure. So I come from really humble beginnings in a smaller town in Maryland. So I actually was the first in my family to go to college. I never saw anyone kind of go through a 4-year university or go into anything finance or investing related. I actually just think I got a little bit of a lucky break. I attended UNC, then went to Google and started Uber and was one of the first 400 employees there. After being at Uber for a few years, I went abroad to lead operations and strategy for the Middle East and Africa. And I found that we were running like a lot of incubators within Uber, which is kind of how you look at startups or any company that's a private company that you want to invest in. And so it became a bit of a natural fit after starting, even like Uber Eats and expanding throughout Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I was very used to looking at a company, poking holes in it, figuring out how much money we could ask the CEO for to invest, which he always cut, by 75%. So it kind of gave me a bit of an experience as an entrepreneur trying to launch that as kind of started as an incubator. I mean, I don't know if people realize the early days of Uber Eats, we were trying to sell pre-made meals like chili and things like that, where you could get in 10 minutes, and it just did not translate well at all. There was no choice on the app. There were maybe 3 meals you could choose. And so this group of ex-Uber employees started this kind of, I would say like venture syndicate, where they were investing in a lot of deals, and a lot of folks had access to, a sizable amount of capital, especially when you combine with other folks. You're kind of using the group economics to get into some of the best deals that are even sometimes former Uber employees have founded these companies. So after investing in like 15 or so companies, I thought, hey, I might actually want to do this for an entire career. And I was ironically in the middle of the B school application process, and I was trying to find someone where I could kind of study under for a few months to learn the deal flow process from end to end. And really, there's a handful of Black people at the top of VC, and maybe a handful is even a bit generous. And I originally reached out with a message to Rashawn Williams, who originally ran Queensbridge Venture Partners for Nas. He didn't respond on LinkedIn, so I commented on his Instagram and then DM'd him and told him, I just want to learn from you for 2 months. I will come down, I will work for free. I will lead all of your strategy and operations. I just want to learn deal flow from end to end. And it so happens that his son was born 5 weeks early. So my first deal I ever had to lead was in Lyft. Coming from Uber, it was kind of like a nice divine step, if you will. And so that's when I kind of really got into VC and realized it was attainable. But I knew that I didn't want to go to the Sequoias of the world or the Kleiner Perkins based in San Francisco or based in some firms in London were also I was chatting with. I really wanted to be under someone that was a general partner at a fund that I could learn under and really learn not just how to write a check. I can do that. I think everyone on this call can probably do that. But I wanted to learn the diligence and the process, the nitty gritty, all of the paperwork, 95% of a deal that no one ever talks about. They only talk about the check writing. So
that's amazing. And clearly everyone here on this panel has a variety of experiences and exposure levels. And I think that just goes to show that, anyone can really do this, which I think is the point of all of this conversation. So I'd love to hear from our entrepreneurs on the panel. Elsie, you alluded to this a little bit by saying, a lot of this is a grind, obviously. Like the startup life can be a grind. I'm sure, Erica, you can identify with that as well. Often having to be scrappy, especially in the early days. You might be still working full time, Elsie, as you mentioned. So I'd just love to hear a bit about that entrepreneurial journey and what were the resources that you used to help you along that journey, and what can people in our audience potentially use if they're starting their own venture, something to consider.
Elsie, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, I could go first. So yeah, straight up, you really have to be scrappy, as you said, Saba. We did a lot of different things. I'll just try to say as much as comes to mind, but I would say it really started with having a passion for the space. So my husband, who is the CEO and created the idea of Breadless, has been eating low carb, no bread, pasta, rice for the past 10 years. So like that is something that he is passionate about. He had realized that there was a real gap in the market for people like him. So where I came into it was, I was in University of Michigan. They have a venture capital fund called Zellery Commercialization Fund, where they focus on early stage investments. So I thought this is a great opportunity to, use the resources that are afforded to me by being a fellow of this VC fund. So I used, I did some due diligence in terms of market sizing to assess opportunity. How many people out there are celiac? How many people are keto or low carb, no carb? And we realized the opportunity, 17% of the market is being underserved in that area. So coming out of that, we basically realized we had to do a ton of things that we've never done before. So I'll start the list now because it's a ton of things. My husband got a job at Jimmy John's. This is someone who's coming from Goldman Sachs, Carlyle, private equity, HBS, and he decided, you know what, I'm so passionate about this. I'm gonna go figure out what it takes to be a sandwich maker at Jimmy John's, because if I'm gonna have a brick and mortar and start a multi-million-dollar, maybe billion-dollar franchise, I need to know what it's like to work in the industry. So that's one thing. Another thing that we did is, call local gyms, call, entities and corporations in Detroit, figure out if we can do a pop-up, come sell products at your gym, come sell products at Tech Town Detroit, wine stores, whatever we could do, we were doing that. Next, how can I leverage all of the resources at University of Michigan? Resources being friends, people who are the heads of student groups, faculty, looking at other schools outside of Ross. How do we start to build, beta tests with our products, opportunities to cater, do pop-ups in Ann Arbor and Detroit. So, we've tried a lot of different things throughout the journey and are still doing so. And I would say that in general, it just really takes a village. And we're grateful that we had a community of people, family and friends at Michigan and elsewhere who were able to help us, people we can call on that know more about the food space or the investing space. So ultimately, there's a lot of scrappiness involved. There is no blueprint. You just got to get out there and get your hands dirty. But I would say don't be afraid to put your idea out there and share it with the world if it's important to you, because serendipity always works in your favor when you're putting out good energy and something good that will really benefit the community. So that's what we've been doing.
That's amazing. And also just, kudos to your partner for being willing to, start essentially from, the ground level to really, prove out that concept. Yeah, that's amazing. Erica?
Yeah, I was going to say +1 to there's no blueprint on how to be an entrepreneur, and starting with something you're passionate about or a problem you experienced. So actually the first startup that I had done was not Ed Left. It was actually called Zamella. And it was because I was so frustrated with not being able to see role models that I could relate to in the tech industry. And so I was like, let me just create something that solves that problem. And so in terms of resources there, I ended up researching a Stanford class where they taught iOS development. I'd never made an iOS app before, but I figured I'm studying computer science, I can learn it on the side as another class credit. So that was kind of one of my first resources that I used was a YouTube Stanford class. And then I also took a Udemy class as well to learn how to create an app. And then in terms of resources, my family, I bugged the crap out of them. I had them downloading every version of the app, telling them, tell me if this breaks. Did this work? What did you think about this? And so use your friends and family as resources to help you get off the ground. And the other thing that I'll say, which everyone should write down, is YC Startup School was actually really pivotal for me. It was a free resource. Anyone can do it, where it's like a lightweight version of Y Combinator that gives you a ton of like video resources on the common problems startup founders face when they're just trying to get off the ground. And there's just so many resources on there that I actually ended up doing it twice while I was in school, and then again while I was working full time at LinkedIn, because it was just that valuable both times. The other resource, of course, that I'll mention is my co-founder and I ended up doing Y Combinator, the accelerator. And so that was really important for us because we thought, okay, we're two Black women in tech. We have to repeat several times that we have CS degrees from Yale and Stanford. How can we make sure that our startup AdLeft is set up for success? And so when we did a lot of research, we looked at, really successful startups, and we saw, okay, this YC thing is on a lot of these startups. Let's make sure we get that for ourselves, so that AdLeft was in a great position. And I would say that was probably one of the most pivotal resources that helped us on our journey. I'm trying to think if there are any more like really tactical things for scrappiness that would be helpful. But I would say also launch before you're ready. I think that's the number one thing, especially for founders who are coming out of corporate or business schools. You think it has to be perfect before you put it in front of users. And I just remember being terrified of launching the first version of every startup I've worked on. But that means you're going to learn way more than you expect, because a lot of startups die because people never put it out there. So I'll leave it at that, but definitely look up Startup School. And then also Apple Entrepreneur Camp. They just launched for Black founders. I did it when it was for women founders, but that was a really pivotal support for my first startup, Zamella, as well.
That's amazing. And yeah, that's a lot of good gems. So I hope people are writing this down. Y Combinator is essentially like creme de la creme of startups. So yeah, definitely want to check that out. So I would love to move to some of the investors on our panel here. Could you maybe speak to, like Erica and Elsie kind of alluded to a little bit, it's a lot of scrappiness, the startup community. Also, a lot of times, I often have heard the relationship between entrepreneur and investor really described more as like a dating pool. So you're kind of dating, finding different investors, trying to see which one's like a good fit. And then, after you get that investment, it's kind of like the marriage piece. So you both are conducting a lot of due diligence on each other. You spend a lot of time together. So I'd love to hear from both of your perspectives as investors. What can entrepreneurs be doing to make sure that they find a good match?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I will tell someone both sides of being an investor and entrepreneur in terms of my advice if they're looking to either raise money or invest money. And I think it's important to put the hat on of the other side a lot of the time, because as an investor, you're obviously going to be looking for the best terms in the deal, right? You're going to walk through a term sheet. You're going to put everything in there that you would possibly want, from ratchet provisions to obviously your pro rata and anti-dilution. You're going to write in everything you can from the jump. But if you really want this to be a long-lasting relationship, you need to make sure that it's fair as well. And I think sometimes I will see term sheets if another firm has led around for someone, and I'm like, you shouldn't probably have agreed to this. The terms are really aggressive. But I think that will, in the end, and maybe I'm just like a karma person, but I think that will come back to the firm that sets that term sheet more often than not. Because when you have a entrepreneur that you're oftentimes, if it's a great company, you're playing offense to get into that deal. The bad deals, you play tons of defense. You're like, no, thank you. This company is not maybe meant for VC money. It's not really going to be a good fit. But if I want breadless and I'm going to go after it, I'm going to do whatever I can to get a meeting with Elsie. I'm going to convince her that we are the firm to write a check in the deal, right? And so I think sometimes the entrepreneur is coming in and maybe they're only looking for, a top 20 VC to lead the round. Great. But you should be trying to, I would say, put on that investor hat whenever you're meeting with potential firms, and vice versa. A lot of VCs will get on and they can be super, I guess the nicest way to say that is cocky because they have a lot of check writing ability. And so they kind of will run through 5 questions, never get to know the founder. What's your traction? What's your TAM? They just fire off questions like that. But who knows where that company could evolve to, right? You have to kind of play the other role as this, like, think of yourself as the entrepreneur. And I say that as someone as Uber, because when I first started Uber, we were doing black car. No one said we were going to do Uber Eats. No one said we were going to make UberX able to replace your car around the world. So black car, I'm sure the TAM was this small and it became, Uber, $100 billion plus company. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, so a couple of things, right? I 100% agree that you have to see it from the other perspective. I'd say in terms of an investor, as a VC, you're technically a professional investor with a fiduciary duty to the folks that gave you money, so the LPs, to really give them the best returns for their money. And so VC is really dependent on kind of like 2 rules, which is the law of large numbers. So you want to invest as much as you can, but there's also the power law. So basically, like, most of your returns are going to come from just 1 or 2 deals that you've made, right? And so you really have to, the rule basically is that you have to invest in the company that you believe will be the $1 billion, the unicorn, the one that will return your fund every single time. You have to have that belief in those investments that you make, right? And so a lot of founders sometimes are like, well, this fits in your area and this would make sense. And it's like, yeah, but like, it's really comes down to like, does that investor have that belief? That means that the system is flawed because, once again, it is only certain investors, most of them majority like white men, very few Latinx and Black folks out here, and so a lot of times they'll try to mitigate risk by investing folks that either look like them or like have the same backgrounds and all that, and so that in itself is just a flawed system. This is a flawed system. That being said, you want to make sure that as an entrepreneur, you're doing the most that you can in order to optimize your chances, right? And if you're minority, you have to work twice as hard, right? I think that just being prepared and like to Erica's point, going to like a YC and like having all those credentials helps, and being very structured in kind of your outreach, right? So thankfully, cash is flush right now. Like, there's more, I don't know if you see this, but people are raising funds left and right. Like, people are starting it's, I think right now it's commodity. And so people are fighting for deals. And so it's one of those things where now you have more folks that have check writing power, and therefore you have to be very structured around it. So I always tell folks to, create an investor pipeline, do your research as to like, if you think, by the way, that venture capital is the right area for you, like right for your business, then this is what I'm telling you. If it's not, which by the way, 90% of companies should not be taking venture capital, then, look at other alternative resources. But I'm just saying, for those that believe that venture capital might be the right fit, make sure you have an investor pipeline, research those firms. Do not contact like us or Eric if like, it's not in our wheelhouse, or like we don't look at those types of deals, right? Like I put it in my Twitter bio, I'm like femtech, silver tech, overlooked communities. Those are the types of things that I'm very focused on. And so I usually get random inbound about a construction company or something. I'm just like, what is this? That means that the person hasn't done their research. And so make sure that you have an investor pipeline, figure out which companies would be best for you. Actually, when it comes to outreach, if you don't have a warm intro, start with the VCs that wouldn't be the best fit first, just so you can get the pitch down. And then over time, work your way towards, the ones in the middle that could be, and then by the end, you have seen all of the questions that they've thrown at you, so you can probably put your best foot forward for the VCs that you really believe will be the right folks to lead your round. So it's those types of things that people don't necessarily talk about, but I always want to make sure that founders, especially minority founders, can make sure that they have the best chances to make the first good impression, because as VCs, we don't have enough time. Like, time is like, especially coming into this early, I used to take every single meeting. I used to do everything, and I would wear myself out, and we're all human. At this point in time, like, it's truly time that is the most valuable for a VC. And therefore, if you don't have your house in order, if you don't make that good first impression, then there are some things that, might fall through the wayside, and, we're just human. And so I think just optimizing your chances, I think, would really be key here.
Yeah, those are some very good tips. And I'd actually like to hear maybe a little bit more about Cheryl and Eric. You mentioned you need to do your research essentially and know what these investors, what their verticals are, what their focus areas are. So you mentioned a little bit about tech, Cheryl. And then Eric, maybe could you elaborate a little bit on what those verticals are for the fund you represent, as well as, just speaking about how entrepreneurs, like, they are sometimes making those common pitfalls. So could you describe what some of those are and what entrepreneurs could be doing to, remedy that essentially and not make those, common mistakes?
Yeah, so for the Manhattan Venture Partners Fund Forward, that's mostly late stage focus. So most likely anyone on this call, we would be finding you. So it's companies that are number one or number two in their industry, typically number one, doing over $100 million in revenue. They're 1 to 4 years away from liquidity. And they have, a proven founder team, and they're backed by a top 20 VC. From the family office, we write early growth and late stage checks. Typically, we start from a place of either a proven founder or backed by a top 20 VC, or a Black or brown founder. That's all the time I have really to invest in founders, if I'm just being honest. And it's going to be Black and brown ones if I'm going to invest my time. But some of the things some of the pitfalls we see is that a lot of time the story that we hear, I think, is that, the Silicon Valley is not investing in Black and brown founders. That's true, but there's also a piece that we're missing, in that a lot of the time generational wealth plays a major part in this. So the first few questions I'll ask a founder are like, do you have skin in the game, and do you have a track record, right? If you don't even have a viable product yet and you're coming to me, I'm not a pre-seed investor, right? So you kind of need to put your own money in, and then what we call the triple F round, which is family, fools, and friends, because if no one knows you and they're putting money in that early, they're kind of a little bit of a fool. And then you're ready for like a seed, maybe Series A, right? And I don't think folks know that you have to bridge that gap to get there. So what Cheryl's doing, I think, is amazing, because you're helping kind of founders really do that triple F round and a seed round, right? Like, they can put their company on a platform, and really right now that doesn't exist. And so I think that the story that's kind of told a lot is that, VCs aren't investing. I know Calendly, Black founder, just raised. If you have the revenue and you have the product, you may not get the valuation that the white boys get in Silicon Valley, but you will get investments. You will get VCs that want to invest in your company. And I think if we would spend more time kind of investing in that really early with the founder, putting their own money in, that's probably the most important question I ask. Because if you haven't put $1 of your own money in and you want 2 million of mine, I mean, we've got a bit of an issue there.
Yeah. And then Cheryl, anything to add to that in terms of common pitfalls?
Let me just say two things, I'd say, from what we've discussed so far. So the first one is around just, once again, what I look for in the different types of roles that I'm in. So in terms of Republic, right, we do pre-seed all the way through Series B. And given how the cap is changing next month, we're actually going to Series C, because we do have some folks in the pipeline that want to use Republic as a way to engage their customers, acquiring customers, market, like this is a perfect way, especially to capitalize on community. As we see like the Ubers and, you know, Airbnbs of the world that like weren't able to get, you know, give equity to the folks that made them who they are, like their super hosts and their drivers and all that. So this is really exciting because that means that we're actually going to be, hopefully, crossing my fingers, actually, I don't know, but the theory would say that, you know, in about a couple of months, a lot of people will know who we are because we'll have great brands that will be raising on our platform. So pre-seed through Series B. I will, however, clarify that generally we don't do pre-revenue. We do post-product, post-revenue. Like on our, like I'd say like 100K, you know, annual revenue as kind of a benchmark, but just, you know, I feel like there is a misconception that we'll take anyone, and we actually accept less than 3% of applications because we want to be the most curated platform. We want to be the gold standard of private investing, right? So that's really key. If you want to go to other platforms, that's fine. You go do your things, but we really want to highlight the companies that we believe will be the winners in the future, right? We have a responsibility to our investor base, the million people that there are on the platform, to give them the best companies. And so that's where like, it might be like after that triple F round, like we'll see, like once you do have traction and everything, I'd say if it's pre-revenue, it would only be if like, you know, you came from YC or like there's a notable VC backing you, or there's a large community aspect to it, which I think that would maximize the value of a campaign. So there's the Republic side. The Lightspeed side is just more around the femtech. Actually, one of my deals just got announced, so super excited for that. And then Silver Tech, which is improving the lives of the elderly, because my knees are cracking at this point. We're all gonna get old at some point. I really want to make sure that our lives are the best possible. And so, and then for the community fund, anything that's community centric. So I'm a little bit more of a generalist there. And it's really exciting because, as you can probably tell, Republic harnesses the value of community. The community fund is focused on community. Lightspeed is more around my specific industries, but they all kind of are symbiotic, which I think is really incredible, because otherwise I would not be able to do my job, right? And so I'd say to the second point, it was really just around, making sure that you know, whoever you're talking to, I think this is a very small world that we live in, and VC investors talk to each other. There are many folks that are, you know, that you might not be a right fit for, you know, an investment from me, but I know maybe some others that might be good. So always treat every single interaction, you know, like, you know, put your best foot forward and like make sure that you treat them in kindness. Because I've seen some founders, for example, who haven't treated their investors well, and then they get a bad reputation, they get kind of like blacklisted, and it's just like not a really good scenario on that side. So it's just, once again, like it's a long game too. So always be cognizant that, like, you know, how you treat people now, other folks can remember. Republic, for example, 2-3 years ago when I joined, people would laugh in my face when I would just mention what Republic was, right? Which, by the way, like, I do not deserve that, and neither does Republic. And I knew the whole mission of what we're trying to do, which, by the way, is finally coming to fruition because of actually COVID gave us positive tailwinds. A lot of people were looking at alternative funding sources. A lot of people were trying to harness the value of community. And so now people are seeing it and people are coming back. And people are like, oh, I think you guys are doing great work. Would love to work with you. And I'm out here with the biggest chip on my shoulder. And I'm like, okay. So to that end, actually, Eric, I wanted to say, I also slipped into Rashad's DMs. Like 2-3 years ago, we had a call about Republic. And so he actually is one of the OGs who actually believes in us. He didn't want to work with us at the time because we were still pretty small, but you know, that was something that I thought was really cool, is that he actually does reply to DMs. So case in point, just make sure to slide into anyone's DMs that you potentially want to talk to.
Those are some great tips. And, you know, speaking of the fundraising journey, I'd love to hear from both entrepreneurs, since both entrepreneurs on our panel actually, as the investors mentioned, it is not always, you know, the best option to raise venture capital, but when you do, it is not an easy journey. Just speaking for, some of the statistics out there that discuss how difficult it can be to raise venture money, and actually it's like less than 5% of Black entrepreneurs have broken the $1 million mark. And both of our entrepreneurs on this panel have broken that mark. So kudos to you, first of all, for making it through that journey. That's, very amazing and something to be very proud of. I'd love to hear from Elsie and Erica on what that journey was like. Was it difficult? What did you experience? And yeah, any challenges along the way, would love to hear.
You want to go, Erica, since I went first last time?
Yeah, for sure. So I always kind of get like a little chills when I have to think back to our fundraising journey. We were in a unique case where we were in the Y Combinator Winner 20 batch, which if you go back in a timeline, that was exactly a year ago. And that meant our demo day was at the start of COVID. So if you go back to when COVID first started and the stay-at-home orders were first put in place, everyone was kind of just like, what the hell is happening? And so what that meant for fundraising was just a lot of funds stopped deploying capital outside of their existing funds or outside of their existing companies. It was really, really hard to meet new VCs if you didn't have existing relationships. And there were just a lot of hurdles that a lot of people just didn't know how to take meetings on Zoom. It hadn't been a year of doing this. And so we were kind of in this state of like, what's happening? And so for us, I think when we first started our fundraising journey, it was like maybe 2 weeks before the stay-at-home order was in place. And so we were on a roll with friends and family. And I knew that this was really ambitious. Here we are, two, 23 and 24-year-olds, Black women who are trying to raise money for our tech startup. And the stats, seem to be against us, but that was kind of what motivated Arnell and I. We loved to break barriers. We loved being underestimated. And so when we first started this round, we had a lot of momentum going in. And then COVID hit. And it was kind of like this moment of YC kind of just saying, get as many meetings as you can, raise as quickly as you can. It was the frenzy. And so what the process looked like, and I think what would be really tactical advice for this group is, Cheryl, I think, mentioned this, but we had a very, very clear list of all of the venture funds that we wanted to reach out to, all of the potential angels. We had a huge Excel of people we wanted to reach out to, and a process that even through the frenzy, we had faith in that process that allowed us to end up closing our round, even though it took longer than we expected. And so if I had to kind of highlight some of the more difficult places or moments of the round, it was having faith in yourself. There were moments where I just got a ton of no's, and you can just feel it in your heart that you're like, oh, I don't want to get on another pitch. But you have to continue iterating on your deck. I think we had over 30 versions of our deck. And after every meeting, I kind of thought through, okay, well, what's core? What do I know is true? What did they kind of squint at and seem confusing, and use every opportunity to improve? I think the other thing is just getting scrappy. A good percentage of our investors came from Twitter. Actually, Kleiner Perkins is now one of our investors because I met Mamoon, a student who was like a big fan of EdLift, had commented on their tweet saying, you have to talk to this founder. And that's how Kleiner Perkins came in, as well as a few other funds. I would say the other thing is just not letting anyone like get in your head. In that, I think there were some times where I was like, racism is real. Like, am I going to be able to do this? Like, is it me or is it racism? Is it sexism? Like, what is the thing that I'm not breaking through? And I just kind of had to remember, like, you are the best one to do this. And that's going to come through in my story. And kind of just pumping yourself up is how you kind of combat that negative wheel that you can allow yourself getting into when you're fundraising. So there are definitely difficult moments, but the most important and tactical advice I could give is just being super scrappy, having a very clear process, and not being afraid to reach out to someone who I never expected Kleiner Perkins to come into our round. And that was really big momentum that allowed us to get oversubscribed even in the middle of the pandemic. So yeah, I'll pass it to you, Elsie.
Yeah, I have a lot of similar stories, and just gonna keep echoing that fundraising is definitely not for the faint of heart. Like, especially when you feel like you've done everything you need to do in terms of having a product, testing it out, getting a job as a sandwich maker at Jimmy John's, you know, like doing pop-ups, having a finance and business school background and all of that stuff, you know, there were months that, you know, we were pitching and we're hearing no after no after no. I mean, for obvious reasons, right? We're going to launch a restaurant, brick and mortar, in the middle of COVID, right? When mom and pops and other restaurants and businesses are shutting down, people are like, listen, you know, we love you guys and we believe in you, but it's a little like, I don't know about this. And you understand that, you get that, and you don't stop. And I got to really say that I got to give a lot of credit to my husband and CEO because he is tenacious. He is unstoppable. And that energy is what really like got us connected. We were like, okay, if you're not interested, we saw this person on your network. Can we talk to them? Oh, now we're talking to them. Now we have informal advisors and people introducing us to other folks, and et cetera. And I would say again, that idea of serendipity was really important for us because, you know, while we're going after these investments and we thought we were going after a $250,000 raise, and we were kind of halfway there, you know, at the height of the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, I think in June or July, we got connected with someone. His name is Cal, and he ended up being our lead investor. He just put something out there that he wanted to invest in Black and brown businesses that he saw as, you know, that could be potentially, you know, unicorns. So, you know, we went after 250,000, and ultimately we ended up closing $1.1 million, led by Cal, who seeded Sweet Greens, Warby Parker, Allbirds, and all these other well-known companies. And then once that happened, everybody else who were like, oh, we don't know, they wanted to get involved. And we're like, come on through. So we got Detroit Venture Partners. And then we started to get so much interest that we couldn't even, you know, appease people. We couldn't even invite anybody else around because it was closed. So I think that if you just keep that energy, and once you get one person on that believes that can back it, I mean, I just feel like that's when it starts to compound, and that is when you've done it. So I can't tell you how many notes we got. I mean, it had to be in the several dozen. So don't ever think that a no means that's the end of the journey, and that's all I have to add.
No, that's amazing. Both of you obviously very tenacious, still, going for it even after you got rejection after rejection. And it just sounds like, yeah, I'll see what you said. You really just need that one yes. And then it's like a compounding effect. And then everybody wants to get in because it has that notoriety, next to your name, or you have, that brand name behind you. So no, that's amazing. LC, I'd love to hear you comment specifically because, you're still working full time, and I would love to hear, how is that balancing both, as well as, what was that decision process like? I know for a lot of entrepreneurs who want to start out, they may have a full-time job and it may not make sense for them to leave their job because that is their source of income. And that may be how they, fund their business for the time being. So, if and when you decide to step away, what does that potentially look like?
Well, that's a great question. I think for us, it's all about prioritization and proper planning, right? So Breadless is the manifestation again of my husband's journey, and he's uniquely suited as a CEO to be able to lead the company. And I'm uniquely suited to be able to help advance the company in areas that are my core competencies. So pre-business school, I have a background in marketing and branding. So we have a division of roles that really makes the situation work. We also have so we have 3 co-founders in total. So myself as a CMO, husband as a CEO, and our friend and colleague, Ryan, who's our chief product officer. So he is the industry expert in terms of food. He has his own catering business. We've known him since we lived in New York, where he opened up Angel of Harlem and other restaurants. So he has that experience. So it's not just us 2. We have 3 people that can divide and conquer as needed. So for me, I felt like I was very much well suited to be able to still do a full-time job in addition to being part of Breadless, because Mark is full-time and so is Ryan. So that works out. Now I will say, now that I'm like literally in the thick of it and we're going through a rebrand, we hired a marketing agency, a design firm, and I'm in reviews all the time. And I work Pacific hours because I work for Microsoft. I'm working from 11:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. And then they know, Breadless team knows that I can't meet with you all unless it's before 11 a.m. or after 8:30 p.m. And so I will say the time, the time work balance, whatever you want to call it, a little crazy, but it works because this is a passion project. This is our baby. We're building something together. It's not like I'm spending the extra limited times, limited work hours or that I have on something I don't care about. And we're building something together as a family, as a friendship group. We're all in it together. So it is a little crazy. I'm not gonna lie. The timing is crazy, but I'm used to overdoing it with the time and being overly involved with stuff. So it works. But if you don't have that passion to keep you going when you're tired, then I would say that this idea or this entrepreneurial endeavor may not be for you, and that's okay. But I know that I have a team that when I can't step in or I might be busy, they're able to work around and make sure that, they have everything they need and meet me where I'm at. So it works really well.
Yeah. Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead,
to that,
Erica.
Saba? For folks who are like thinking about leaving their jobs, I think it's one of the most common questions I get asked is like, how did you know when to leave? Like, is there just kind of some magical moment? And my answer to that is always that like probably 6 months before I actually left, I was ready to quit. Like I just met some like amazing women founders. I was like, oh my God, I have to do this. Like every second that I'm not working on this company full time is an opportunity missed. I had so much energy and I got back to work and I was like, oh Lord, I can't do this. Like it's too soon. And so it was this up and down journey, but what really helped get over the hump for me was making a literal list of what needs to be true for me to feel confident and comfortable, like leaving my job. And it was having 6 months of expenses, like literally writing that number down and putting that in the bank. It was having a list of advisors that from LinkedIn that I had in my circle. And so I think the top advice is just make a list of what needs to be true for you and you'll reach that point because the golden handcuffs are very, very real. And that was a hard journey for myself. Yeah.
No, that makes total sense. And I know this, Cheryl and Eric, you kind of mentioned this a bit earlier, but just one more thing before we go turn over to questions, Q&A. VC doesn't always make sense for a lot of companies. Cheryl, you mentioned like for 90% of businesses, it probably isn't the best fit. And not every business model is suited very well for to accept venture capital funding. So I'd just love to hear Cheryl or Eric or both of you, what are some of the other resources that entrepreneurs should be looking at in terms of trying to finance their business outside of VC?
Yeah, I can take this one first. So once again, VCs are looking for, scalable businesses, ones that can exit in like 5 to 10 years, right? Generally more like 5, 7, but they want things that will grow very rapidly, that, will IPO or get acquired for $1 billion, right? So it's one of those things, once again, that you really have to figure out what's right for you. So if you are not on that track, I think a couple of resources are anything from, maybe grants. So I know SoGal does a lot of them. Fellowships, Camelback is really good, especially for minority entrepreneurs. There are also, there's rewards crowdfunding. So like a Kickstarter, Indiegogo, especially if you are more of the pre-product, pre-revenue type phase where you're like, let's test this out. Let's galvanize our community. Let's figure out if there is going to be product market fit here. So, or iFund Woman actually is another really good one that they actually coach you as to how to go about doing a crowdfunding campaign, because it's not just like put on the platform and that's it. There's a lot of work that goes into it. Obviously, Republic is one in terms of more crowd investing, private investing, micro, retail investing, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, it's but as I mentioned, it's more specifically for companies that already have traction and could use this in order to galvanize their community. Other things could be, potential like revenue share, debt opportunities, maybe through lighter capital, or some banks that like would be great for giving you more of a line of credit, or a couple other opportunities in order to if you're not scaling at at a pace that VC wants, you at least can go ahead and use what you currently have, your cash flow, and then potentially leverage that for cash more upfront. There's actually new things coming out in that same vein, like Pipe, Clearbank, Coral, There's also bootstrapped VC that is not necessarily focused on you going all the way to $1 billion, but they will give you cash up front for just a little piece of equity. But you can pay most of the money back to get a lot of it back, a lot of the equity back. So Collab Capital, Indie VC, Earnest Capital are the top three to come to mind. There are just so many. I can actually drop in the chat some presentations that I've done around this. One in terms of finding angels that I did for I think WeWork, and another one's just more around the landscape. So I'll drop those in there. But it's really about doing your research and figuring out what type of capital, whether it's equity, hybrid debt equity, straight debt, a revenue share, profit share that works best for you.
That's awesome. And that's pretty comprehensive. And yeah, thank you for being willing to drop those resources in the chat. I really hope everyone has enjoyed this conversation. I hope you got some tactical advice from this and building out, your ventures, or if you're thinking about building a venture, what it takes. So with that, I'd love to thank our panelists and open the floor for Q&A. So if you want to ask a question, feel free to use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, and I will unmute you and you can ask your question directly. So let's transition. All right. Let's see. Anyone? I don't know if anyone has a question. I don't see anyone raising their hand. All right, so we have a question from Marion. Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Amazing. Thank you all for being on this panel. It's very, very informative for me because I'm actually looking to go both routes, both the entrepreneurship and the VC route. But I'm curious, and this is a question for the VCs, right? It seems like VC at large is a very tribal kind of environment, meaning people tend to invest from either schools that they've already been to or in specific regions. And I'm wondering if you guys see a trend going in opposite directions. So for example, I know right now, with everything that happened last year, more VCs are kind of expressing that they want to fund minority or women entrepreneurs. But do you think that that is going to be something that's longstanding? And then do you also think that there is some space for VCs to start looking in different parts of the region, right? So for example, like your Midwest or your Southwest, as opposed to kind of looking on the East Coast or the West Coast?
Yeah, I think from a location perspective, I mean, just being here in Atlanta, people are popping up startups and companies anywhere now. And I think most folks are becoming more regional agnostic, for lack of a better term. It's interesting because some of the top 20 VCs we have relationships with, I know that they will not take a meeting with someone without a warm intro. And so if you're only keeping your network to people you know, and you only know people who look like you, then you're never going to really meet many Black and brown founders. So I think I think investing for community's sake and in Black and brown founders is probably here to stay. But what I wish would happen a bit differently is that people stop looking at Black and brown founders as charity and start looking to them as great investments in companies, because the truth is the data is behind that. If your C-suite is not diverse, then your company's performance suffers. So if you're an investor and the companies you're investing in is not diverse, your portfolio and your returns will likely suffer as well. And so another thing that I see a lot of the time is that it'll be like these large billion-dollar funds, Andreessen or other firms, and they'll pop up a $10 million fund for Black and brown founders instead of writing a $10 million check from the main fund. So I think those things, if they started to happen, could be much more impactful, in my opinion, just from the founders I've seen. Some of these founders don't need $50,000 checks. They need $2-3 million checks. And they're only being offered, even from these, multi-billion-dollar VC firms, these very small checks. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, Eric is absolutely right. There's been a lot of performative theater going on in the VC community where, there's a lot of mentorship and not a lot of checks being written. And so I think, once again, that's why I'm at Republic and I took that pay cut from the traditional finances, because I really do believe that with more democratization, anybody around the world can actually invest in companies that they believe in. And actually, I don't know if you guys saw, maybe you did, but Arlen from Backstage, she actually raised on Republic, which was pretty interesting because that opens a new model as to how, and I'll drop it in the chat, where you can now invest in, well, the sub-advisor of a VC, which is pretty interesting because now that also allows you to invest like a VC and kind of support folks that are in fact democratizing VC through investing in minority entrepreneurs, because that is, I think there's even more conviction that that is something that is your fiduciary duty, is to really invest in the best startups, especially ones that potentially are undervalued or overlooked. And so Republic is awesome too, because we've helped companies in over 32 states now. I actually went to Atlanta, that was my last trip before the pandemic hit, because we also have a Republic Cities initiative where we go to emerging ecosystems that to really understand them, like, because Atlanta has a very different ecosystem than Austin, than Miami, than Detroit, and that's where we have presence. And so it's really understanding them and figuring out how do we best support in what ways, and kind of empowering folks to not come in as just like impose ourselves, but rather say where in the ecosystem do we fit and how do we best make sure that we're supportive. And so there is a trend, but VC is a lot of smoke and mirrors. That's part of the reason why I hate about it. But if you really find those that are authentic and actually talk and walk the walk, you'll be good.
All right. Cheryl, just to follow up on that, I saw Arlen, she was able to raise over $1 million in less than 24 hours, which is
in less than 9 hours, actually. That was hot. That was
like
I'm
incredible.
It was amazing. / also I got so little sleep. It was great. It was Republic HQ was on fire, like internally too.
I can imagine. I just love to hear maybe a bit, maybe this will be our last question, but with something like that, you're not only democratizing access to, deals to just everyday people, but allowing them to actually potentially build some wealth by essentially being an LP, a limited partner in someone's fund. So I would love to hear potentially, how do you think this really changes the landscape for the future in terms of, just anyone being able to come on and invest in a fund?
Yeah. So let me clarify, actually. So It is technically not the fund. It is the operating company under the fund. And what the use of proceeds will be is actually not for direct investing, because technically regulation crowdfunding, which is the Title III of the Jobs Act, states that anything that is raised through Reg CF cannot be used for investment. And so that's kind of what the deal was. But at the same time, what it frees up is more money for Arlen to then go and invest, which is great, because now she has a lot of money to use for more of the operation side of things. And so and by the way, and actually will not say that. I will say that what it does allow her to do is really galvanize the crowd that she already created. It also allows folks to get on this journey, because now she actually can talk to them as investors and say hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we're up to, and here's how you can support. And people don't realize that VCs can say they're value add, may put a Medium article here and there, call it a day. But what we do kind of capitalize on are the network effects. So whether it's Arlen or another startup, when you have all these thousands of investors that have invested in your company, they're connected to other people, and so that has helped a lot of our startups get new customers. There was actually someone who said, oh yeah, my brother actually runs a couple of NFL stadiums, why don't you talk to them, since you help save energy for large properties. And so that company got $1 million in customers just directly from that connection, right? And you just multiply that by like the 2,000 people, 3,000 people that are in your campaign. It's crazy. We can't guarantee that, but that's something that I think is power community. Drops fill the bucket. People are, want to be part of something much bigger than themselves, especially in a time COVID, we're all siloed. Like, we're not out here in these streets. We're out here like trying to feel like we're part of something bigger and part of a mission. And so that's, I think, the real power of this is just the community aspect of everything. And so that's why I also think building generational wealth is so important. Once again, 90% of companies also die. So it's a higher risk game. And I wouldn't recommend putting all your money in Republic. That would be crazy. It's just another way to diversify your portfolio, and it's high risk, but it's also high return. And so, I think if anything, just opening up this asset class that was previously for just, the 3% of Americans that were accredited, right? Like opening that up to anyone to invest $50 in a startup is, I think, going to be the next wave.
That's awesome. I guess there's just one clarifying question here. Someone wanted to know, so if you're investing into Backstage on Republic, do you then get some ROI if Backstage, happens to exit a company?
So that's the thing, actually. So that operating company is able to get 10% of the carry of existing and future investment plus management fee. And so it really also depends on Arlen raising more money, which means that they end up getting a piece of that 10% of the AUM that grows over time, right? So it actually does, in fact, give kind of like a quote unquote dividend, because you are, in fact, you are banking on the fact that Arlen can in fact raise more money and will then have exits, which, by the way, I mean, she does have some good companies in her portfolio like Share and Healthy Root Dolls and a couple of others that have raised Series B, C rounds. And so that's really a great part of this, is that it's kind of like an evergreen fund in a sense of, and so that's hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it seemed like the person was satisfied with that answer. So that's awesome. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. I hope this has been a great conversation for you, and that, you learned something new, got some tactical advice. And thank you to all our panelists for giving us your time, your advice, and just information, because I really do think the differentiating factor is really just information access. It's just access to the right information at the right time. So with that, I'd like to end this panel. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of ALE, everyone. Bye.
Thank you all.